So canning potatoes is super simple for the purpose of not having everybody watch me peel and chop potatoes. I have already got these potatoes peeled and they have been cut into segments that are about this size. So maybe the size of a ping pong ball or just slightly smaller. You do not want your pieces to be too small or they will get really mushy when you pressure can, but you don't want the pieces to be too big, because if they're too big, then they will not cook thoroughly. You want all of your pressure can foods to be completely safe. So you can see that this is about the size of my chopped up potatoes. So I'm gonna fill up my last jar here. And as always, you're going to fill to 1 inch of headspace, which is at the bottom of the ring bands. And then I'm going to fill with water. I'm working with cold potatoes and I will be working with cold water, and I'm gonna start with a cold canner. You always want your temperatures to match. Cold canner, cold water, cold jars, or hot canner, hot jars, hot food inside, and hot water to fill them up. A lot of people dry can potatoes. I don't know if that is a approved recipe. I've always covered my potatoes in water and I feel like it keeps them fresher. And another thing I want to mention is when you chop your potatoes up and have them in your bowl, you want to rinse them several times and even let them soak and do another rinse. That gets most of that starch out, and that way when your jars are pressure canned, they won't be super cloudy full of starch. So I've got my jar filled up. I'm going to fill this up with water up to the 1 inch headspace mark. Hope you can see this. I'm using filtered water from my Brita filter. I always keep some in my tea kettle on the stove. But you do not want to use chlorinated water. It just is really not good. You want to have the freshest, most filtered water that you can. So this is up to 1 inch of headspace. And now I'm going to debubble. I've already debubbled most of my jars, but I'm going to go ahead and debubble this one. You can see the bubbles are coming up. You just want to get any air pockets out. Make sure all your potatoes are covered with water, because if they stick up out of the water, they're going to turn a grayish color. That does not mean that they're bad. They're still fine to use. They're just not as pretty. So I try to make sure all my jars are covered, all my potatoes are covered, debubbled well. If I needed to add any additional water after I debubbled, but this is right at the 1 inch of headspace mark, which is right here. And I am going to add 1/8 of a teaspoon of Redmond's real salt. You do not have to salt your potatoes, or you can season them with whatever kind of seasonings you want. Some people put garlic powder, onion powder, but I'm just adding 1/8 of a teaspoon. I think that it helps keep the potatoes a little fresh. Salt is a preservative, and so I add just that small amount to help keep them fresh and give them a little flavor. So that's done, and now I need to wipe off the rims of my jars, get my lids on, and we'll put them in the pressure canner. Now, because these jars are relatively clean, the food that I'm putting in these jars is not greasy. I did not dip my paper towel in vinegar. If I were canning something like meat or something that was greasy or very messy, like maybe a tomato-based product, I might dip my paper towel in some vinegar, or I could use a clean cloth. But just want to make sure all my rims are clean. Make sure also, as you're filling your jars, you want to inspect the top of the jars and make sure there are no little nicks. If there was a little nick in one of the tops of these jars, it could prevent the lid from sealing appropriately. So I always simmer my lids. You don't have to. They say, the manufacturers of the jars say you don't have to anymore, but it's just an old habit, and I feel like it keeps everything clean. You know, so there's your sealing lid, and you want that to make a good contact on the top of your jar. Pressure canning should not be intimidating. It is a little scary to have that fully pressurized pot on the top of your stove. We've all heard the stories about the lids blowing up, going through the roof, hurting people. But if you really are careful, take all the proper precautions, you should not have a problem. I have been canning for years. I have never had one of my seals fail on the top of the pressure canner. I have in the past noticed that it wasn't pressurizing completely. Something seemed off. Maybe there was some liquid coming out the sides. I knew that the seal was not closed properly. I need to turn it off, let it cool down, open it up, and reseal it. So just bear in mind that you need to keep an eye. Your steam should only be coming out the vent on the top of the canner, and I'll show you that later. Now I'm going to finger tight the screw-on lids. That means just to where you feel a little resistance, but not squeeze down real tight. Your jars have to build up pressure and vent a little as they. Now, if you feel like the lid did not go on, you'll feel the threads. You want to back it off and re-screw it on until you feel it clamp down properly. Now, like I said before, cold jars, cold canner. You fill the pressure canner to about 2 inches of water. That works out to about 3.5 quarts of water for my size pressure canner. I think this is a Presto 24 quart, very, very old canner, probably from the 1970s. Got it from my husband's uncle, and it has been a workhorse for us. Finger tight. Okay, my canner will hold 7 jars on the bottom, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and put in. Because my jars are cool, my water is not hot, I am not going to use my can lifter. When I take them out, I will use this, but I don't need to right now because nothing is hot. Go ahead and get these in here, and then I'll bring you around and show you what they look like inside the canner and how much water. The 7 jars is a just perfect fit. Now I can see that the water level is about this high on my jars. I'm going to turn you off and bring. So I've got my pressure canner lid on, and I'm going to turn up my heat. I'm going to go ahead and put it on high. You know I'm videotaping, honey. Find the cheese? Okay. So we're going to let this heat up, come to full pressure, and I will start to see steam coming out the vent. And once it's vented for 10 minutes, I want to see steam rising for 10 minutes, I will put my weight on. So I'm going to let this steam come out the top for about 10 minutes, and that will tell me that it's reached full pressurization, and I'll put my weight on the top, Now I've got my weight at 15 pounds of pressure on the top of my canner. I will let it reach full pressurization, which I will know when the weight on the top starts to rock continuously. Once it's started to rock continuously, I'm going to back down the temperature until it's just rocking once every few seconds, not continuously. Now I did mention that this canner is probably from the late 1970s, but I want to say that I have replaced the rubber gasket on the inside of the lid, and I have replaced the weight on the top. You can buy those parts on the Presto canner website or even off of Amazon. But you want to make sure that your seal, your rubber gasket inside, is free from any cracks. It's not too stiff. It wants to be nice and pliable. You don't want to use an old gasket that might fail. So this is what I mean when I say a steady rocking. So once it reaches this point, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to turn the temperature down to a lower heat, like around 6 on my burner. And then this should slow down and not rock as frequently. Once the temperature cools down a little bit, it will ease off. Down a little bit more. Starting slow down a little bit. There you go. So this is going to be where I keep it for the full 90 minutes. And we'll come down just a little bit more. The end after it's cooled down, and I'll show you the dollars coming out.